Hello and welcome to our webinar, Meet Booklist Reader. I'm George Kendall, editor and publisher of Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Today's slide presentation, along with some other informational links, were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. If you have any trouble accessing these materials, please reach out to us in the Q&A box or contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will leave some time at the end of today's program to answer your questions, and we'll follow up on any unanswered questions after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. We are so excited to introduce you to our new magazine, Booklist Reader. Today, you'll hear from Booklist staff, including myself, Booklist editors, Susan McGuire and Heather Booth. Booklist marketing specialist, Grace Rosine, will moderate Q&A, and we'll hear from our special guests, Rebecca Vnuk, Executive Director of LibraryReads, Kaite Stover, Director of Reader Services at Kansas City Public Library, and Montoya Barker, Special Collections Librarian at the Indianapolis Public Library. But first, a few words about Booklist Reader. A few years ago now, the Booklist team had several internal discussions about strategies to boost awareness of great books, to celebrate and promote reading, to showcase books that educate, entertain, and inspire, and to connect readers with great books and audiobooks that may not otherwise be easily discovered. As part of this initiative, we wanted to highlight diverse reads for all ages and for all communities. Booklist Reader, which launched digitally in September 2021, is a result of those discussions. The cover images here highlight our first several issues. This next slide showcases more recent Booklist Reader covers. Whereas Booklist itself is a pre-publication review magazine, Booklist Reader highlights books that are available now and also includes timely and relevant interviews, real likes, essential lists, and more. Booklist Reader helps to promote reading to all audiences and includes high-interest themed lists. For example, the September issue focuses on mystery and true crime, and the October issue focuses on sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. In addition to featuring new releases in a section we name Reserve These Reads, which is in each issue, we also focus on promoting backlist titles in Booklist Reader, which are more likely to be immediately available in libraries. And we'll hear today from Rebecca Vnuk. But I wanted to mention here, we're thrilled with our partnership with LibraryReads, and Booklist Reader features top books library workers are reading each month across the country. Since we launched Booklist Reader digitally, we wanted to be sure that the value for libraries and their patrons was included with the cost of a Booklist subscription. For those attendees today who subscribe to Booklist, the product can easily be shared digitally with library patrons. We published a short video on YouTube available from our site that goes through the easy steps to share. These are just a few of the libraries highlighting Booklist Reader Digital on their website. This is an example from Montgomery County Memorial Library System, and they highlight Booklist right here. Give a lot of real estate space on their site for that one. You can go to the next slide. This is Stonington Public Library. They also give a lot of real estate screen space to Booklist Reader, and they mention to their patrons it's for the low cost of $0. And then this is from Dunedin Public Library in New Zealand, so we have some international exposure. And there are many more libraries that are sharing Booklist Reader digitally, and those are highlighted in a blog post that we have featured on our blog. We can send a link out to that. Because we know that not all patrons can or do interact with libraries digitally, and many enjoy the physical space in libraries, and I'm counting myself there, I'm always in libraries, we are planning to launch Booklist Reader in bulk print starting in January. Of course, there are manufacturing costs associated with print, So there is a separate charge for Booklist Reader and print, but we feel that print will extend the value to more and encourage reading to wider audiences. And we hope library friends groups will consider supporting print subscriptions to this valuable publication. And now we'll move on to our speakers. This slide covers what you'll hear today, all with a focus on Booklist Reader as a companion to celebrate reading, education, book discovery, and connection with library workers, patrons, and everyone who loves to read. It is my pleasure to hand this presentation over to Heather Booth. Heather, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, George. So I'm going to talk briefly about the editorial side of Booklist Reader, the content that we highlight, how it gets there, and why it'll be useful to you and your patrons. Next slide, please. So the Booklist Reader, as you might have guessed, starts with booklist editors. Many of us are degreed librarians, and all of us have years of experience working with our designated subject areas, from board books for our littlest patrons, through high interest fiction and nonfiction for teens, to the best in fiction, nonfiction, genre fiction for adults, and even audiobooks. Editors select the books that will be reviewed in Booklist, and we assign them to freelance reviewers who also have gobs of library and book experience. Our recommendations are geared toward helping you as library workers to select and present the content that your patrons are going to benefit from in all areas of their needs and interests. This wealth of knowledge is what feeds the content for Booklist Reader. Next slide, please. As we select titles for review and organize our issues, diversity plays heavily into our work. We strive in each section to feature a wide range of titles to meet broad patron interests, and we know that diversity comes in all forms. Our content spans dozens of publishers, many genres, titles for a lifetime of reading, and it includes the many wonderful identities and backgrounds that we celebrate in our patrons, offering them windows to people who may be different from them, mirrors to find communities of affinity, and doors they can walk through and learn more about our world. Next slide, please. If you already use Booklist, you know that each issue offers a spotlight topic. As George mentioned, these spotlights form the structure of the Booklist Reader, and you can see some of the spotlight topics listed here. What is especially useful to you as a library worker is that you will have already seen each of these spotlights in previous issues of Booklist. Can you go to the next slide? So when your patron brings you a copy of the Booklist Reader and says, I'd like all of the books on this trend alert of women in the SOE, you'll have already had months to review that, that list of books, check your catalog, order any titles that suit your community, because you can see here, these titles were listed in the May 2021 issue of Booklist, which you would have gotten as a librarian. And then it wasn't until September 2021, several months later, that the books are then presented to your patrons when they're finally on the shelf. Next slide, please. So as you saw in that slide, the pages of the Booklist Reader don't look exactly like the pages of Booklist, even though we're including some of our readers' favorite features. And that's because every favorite element from Booklist is reshaped and formatted specifically for patron readability. We're keeping all of the most useful, display-ready, high-interest titles and lists, but we're increasing the font size, increasing the white space, adding images, and spreading 2-column lists into full pages and full page lists across beautiful 2-page spreads. So patrons have all of the expert content that they can rely on from Booklist with more casual reading experience, more akin to an entertainment-focused magazine. So to talk more about bridging content, expert content with high demand titles, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca Vnuk from LibraryReads.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. So I just want to take a really quick moment to explain LibraryReads for those of you who may not be familiar with us already. We are a registered 501c6 not-for-profit group that started as a volunteer organization, actually. In 2013, a group of a dozen librarians were at an ALA conference, and they were brainstorming on how they could harness the power of library staff recommendations to create a nationwide list of recommended reads. I know we are all very tired of people only coming in with the New York Times bestseller list. And you can find a list on any topic for children's books under the sun, but adults really don't have anything. There's awards, of course, but the great thing about Library Awards is it's very different from a bestseller list or an awards list. First of all, it's always pre-pub books. And it's not picking the best of anything. There's not a jury, there's not a committee. The list is actually created from library workers just like you across the United States. If you have access to Edelweiss and/or NetGalley, you are already part of LibraryReads and might not have known it. Anytime you download a pre-pub book, you will get the option to give it a LibraryReads vote. We put it together and we get our lovely little list there. The organization also exists to offer free readers advisory training and programming for public library staff across the country. So I'm going to give a quick plug for our website, which is libraryreads.org. You can find the current list. You can find our archive of 10 years worth of lists, so over 1,200 backlist books to look at, and more information on how you can participate. But what I'm really here to talk about is how pleased we are to be working with Booklist Reader. And I've got a copy of it right here. I'm going to just show it off just a little bit in print. You can see it there on the slides too. We have been hitting state and local conferences this year, and we've been bringing along copies of it. We've been showing off how lovely it looks in print, and we really could not be more pleased. But besides how great it looks, what we're really excited about is to be part of this fantastic content available to your patrons. I will share a little anecdote with you here. When I first was in library school, we had a student lounge. And I remember the first week of school, heading there in between classes, I had a break, was going to sit down. And in the student lounge, there were about 10 tables, and every one of them had stacks of library publications on it. So I was at a table where there were, 10 different copies of a year's worth of Booklist. And I picked it up and I was like, oh, I'm going to need to know what this is. And as soon as I started reading through it, I thought to myself, wait a minute. Why do only library workers get this information? This is not fair. Like I was flipping through and I was like, I want to read this book. I want to read that book. I want to read this book. The reviews were so spot on and so fantastic that I probably scribbled a whole notepad worth of paper of books that I wanted to read. And I really, ever since then, have been thinking, how do we get patrons these wonderful reviews to read? So when George and the Booklist team contacted me to tell me that they were doing Booklist Reader, I was like, that is one of the best ideas I've heard in a long time. Condense that wonderful Booklist content into something that's meant explicitly for readers. It's going to be, something that they can pick up and be excited about what's on the shelf, what they can read soon. So I'm really excited that LibraryReads is featured in this. I think it is really a great way for your patrons to see a little bit of what's coming up next, as well as, I know you can't see on the screen, but if you're familiar with our lists at all, every one of those books has a little annotation, probably about a quarter of the size of a Booklist review. So it's a little annotation that has one line of plot description, one line of appeal factors, and another line of read-alikes. So they can take that, look at it, and they're all signed reviews from library workers across the US. So it's personal recommendations. So we really could not think of this. It could not possibly be a better fit. We feel what we do and what Booklist does for readers is just such a wonderful match, and we're so pleased to be part of it. So if you got any questions, you can always reach out to me. My email is rebecca@libraryreads.org, or go and check out our website for more information. And with that, I will pass it over to Kaite Stover.
Hello, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here for this webinar. I have been loving Booklist Reader, and I wanted to tell you all a little bit about how Myself and my assistant, Alicia Helms, have been talking about Booklist Reader lately because this is going to be what I'm thinking of as maybe the boring part of this webinar, because we're just talking about how we're going to use Booklist Reader. And we came up with a really interesting game plan for how we could use it digitally in our library and how we hope to use the print version when we can subscribe to that. So we came up with 3 areas where we're going to work with Booklist Reader: staff training, our patrons, and programming. So with our staff training, the first thing that Alicia said we needed to do was to make sure that we include a link to Booklist Reader, the digital version, in our staff newsletter. And she also pointed out we need to make sure that we note the month and the year. And I want to also have us highlight a particular article for the staff to find, because we'll have the link to the issue, but that's probably not going to entice our staff enough. If we give them a teaser for one of those themed articles, that's really going to get them going. We loved the timely pieces on the current topics, and we think those are really good for staff to know. And then we also brainstormed how we're going to use it in staff training in use of library collections, our collection connection or reader's advisory, if you will. We love that the Booklist Reader has these genres and subgenres in these bite-sized chunks with definitions of appeals, the benchmark trends, and up-and-coming titles. I'm also encouraging my front-facing staff to read it during their downtime at the desk. There's good examples of annotations in the wild. This is what I really want them to see, because I can teach them how to write an annotation, but it helps for them to keep reading these different annotations, the reviews that are in Booklist that go with the lists, the annotations that LibraryReads includes. All of these listed are this is just patron gold. And I have to point out, Rebecca, that what Alicia liked most in the first Booklist Reader that she looked at was that she could see what LibraryReads looked like on those 2-page spread. She's been voting, but she said it's really cool to see it in print, to see what it looks like. What we also liked is that breakdown of age groups, good for staff who may not work with youth or adults. So that's a great way for my staff to keep current in a short amount of time. And the themes are also a great way to instruct staff. We really like the spotlight topics in Booklist Reader. We know they show up in Booklist, but all of my staff can't get to Booklist online the way I want them to, whether it's in print and we're passing around the copies among all the collection development folks, or whether it's just digital and they're so busy. But these bite-sized entertainment type chunks in Booklist Reader are really going to be useful when it comes to training. And then Alicia and I talked about how to work with our patrons, and she says she's already using it for creating lists using our online patron suggestion form, KCPL's Shelf Help. And she also thinks that once we get it in print, we want to put it near the browsing or Lucky Day collections and in our magazine collection, right near our literary magazines. We're going to try and highlight it in our patron newsletter again and again, mentioning the month and the year and drawing attention to a particular article that's timely, as well as linking to the digital edition. We plan to do some displays around the issue, in addition to displays featuring titles on particular lists. So some of the themes that Booklist Reader is presenting, that's marvelous display content. We're looking forward to working with that. And we're also going to look at just grabbing one of the particular featured lists in the magazine and using that as a display. And then in print, we want to put that near the holds with the displays, with the new books. Our idea is to send some out with our bookmobile and for outreach visits, because it's a lot easier than hauling boxes of giveaway books to just send them out with a handful of Booklist Reader. With our patrons, we can also talk to them about the themes and get the patrons to explore other formats and age range themed literature. And then while we were talking about how to use Booklist Reader with our programming, if our library is offering a themed program that already melds with the Booklist Reader theme, we're going to be able to use that to find titles to display at the program or on a list that we post online with our event announcement. I mentioned taking a handful to all of our outreach programs. We're also flipping through Booklist Reader and looking for programming ideas that maybe haven't occurred to us before. So some of those themes we're hoping to use to inspire programming, book group selections, library-sponsored book buzz programs. We're also looking at using them for inspiration for some of the writing classes we offer at KCPL and companion pieces for the film programming that we offer at KCPL. And we're definitely going to be looking at using those author interviews as supporting materials for all of our book group discussions. Those are really easy to just print off and drop in a book group bag and send out to the community facilitators or the library facilitators. So that's how KCPL is brainstorming how we're going to be using Booklist Reader. And I want to ask you all to please welcome Montoya Barker, who will talk a little bit more about using Booklist Reader in depth for book groups and community and displays.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Montoya Barker, and I'm a special collections librarian at the Indianapolis Public Library, located downtown in downtown Indianapolis. And I've worked for the library since 2015. I'm a member of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, the Indiana Black Librarian Network, and I'm also a NASA Solar System Ambassador volunteer. I enjoy researching and designing informative program topics for adults. I'm always looking for ways to find engaging topics focused on local culture, history, and society, whether it be attending professional webinars, attending programs at other libraries. Some of you have probably seen my name pop up at your virtual programs on the Zoom, or just browsing our library databases for ideas, or in this case, using Booklist Reader for exploring new topics and new books that will resonate with patrons. In my trade secrets article published in Booklist back in March of this year, I highlighted topics that can help librarians boost engagement with your readers, promote your collection, design programs, and captivate your communities with hopefully some fresh insights and ideas. I focused on 5 main topics: book clubs and preparation, books to lecture topics, commemorating historical events, sometimes with food, community need, and creating displays inspired by Booklist Reader. So for time, I'll just highlight a few tips and strategies I thought would provide you with insight and be the most relevant for everyone today. If you work in a public library, hopefully at some point you've encountered a book club patron or your library runs a book club. Not only can you use Booklist Reader to generate possibles for your upcoming book discussions, if your book club likes reading historical fiction, for instance, you can use Booklist Reader to find titles and that focus on the history behind those novels. What I like to do with my book club is research and discuss the book's symbolism, the genre, themes, and any related online tools, basically topics that can be further explored and analyzed throughout the discussion. In the case of Booklist Reader, it covers a variety of historical literature. You've got Black historical fiction exploring Indigenous stories and historical romance heroines who dare to be different, for example. So perhaps if you use Booklist Reader to select a historical fiction novel one month, and maybe the next month you could use Booklist Reader to find a nonfiction title to read that examined the history behind that novel. If it's sort of like books versus the movie, but only in this scenario, you're comparing a historical fiction novel versus the biography or the subject matter that inspired the novel. In the Trade Secrets article, I also mentioned Booklist Reader's monthly issues and recommendations for books that will help patrons learn about global history, awareness of critical topics in our communities, and remembrances for historical figures. So I'm talking about in recognition of human rights awareness, or Juneteenth, or Puerto Rican Heritage Month, and identity recognitions. Then you also have another aspect for commemoration programming, and that would be foods and drinks from important historical events in history. So that could be using Booklist Reader for recommendations on diverse foods that are traditionally served during some of those special holidays and cultures, such as stories of African-American cuisine, Chinese soul food books, or books on Haitian dishes. So basically throughout the year, you can use Booklist Reader to sort of be your guide to highlight Books focus on upcoming remembrances, special holidays from cultures around the world, and create a series of programs using some of your local expert historians, or maybe even articles from your own library databases that you match up with the books or topics highlighted in Booklist Reader. And this also matches up with those high interest lists that George Kendall mentioned earlier. And the last two topics I'll quickly combine and summarize just for time: books to lecture and community need. This is where your library's strategic plan really establishes everything from your library's vision, roadmap, or priorities for including, but not limited to, your programs. Your library's strategic plan will probably address programs including promoting diverse and inclusive access. It could include information from a racial equity perspective, financial trends, reoccurring trauma-sensitive topics in your community, or to even just telling the story or educating patrons about their local community. So basically, those vital priorities your library wants you to address in your programs. Booklist Reader releases so many different options that you can use, once again, as just a jumping off point for your programs. You could take some of those featured memoirs and biographies and share those true stories as lecture topics. Booklist features books focused on hidden history, racial dynamics, social customs. All of those books can be used as program topics. You can offer them, the programs, in person, of course. You can offer them as virtual programs or even hybrid programs. And I'm going to end with some of my programs I've delivered for adults that have been inspired by books, including one of our most valuable measurable outcomes, which is program attendance. Some of those books you see on this slide were used to research those programs or used in displays to promote the program. And any of the books that have that little reflective perspective picture format on your screen, it means they were previously featured in Booklist. If some of you on this webinar know me, you know that The Martian by Andy Weir has inspired several of my NASA-themed programs, including book discussions. And you'll also know that it's one of my favorite books, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to highlight the book in my slide in today's webinar. So that's the end of my time. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to attend my portion of the webinar. Have a good day, everyone, and happy programming. Susan, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Take it away.
All right. So Kaite Stover touched on some of this and Montoya touched on some of this as well, but I'm going to talk about it with slides. Booklist Reader is a great resource for patrons, but staff can also use it as part of their readers' advisory duties. Here are a few ideas that staff in many different levels can do. Next slide. Use the list to create displays. Oh, sorry, hold on. We talked about the themed list in every issue, so there's plenty of inspiration. You can also do an as seen in the Booklist Reader display and include items from all over the magazine in one spot. Next slide. It's not unusual to create a read-alike list for those titles with a long holds queue. We all know how many James Patterson read-alike lists we've put together. You can use the Reserve These Reads list in every issue. There's one in youth and there's one in adult to find titles for which you'll need to create a read-alike list. So the Reserve These Reads is what Heather talked about in Booklist, in regular Booklist. That's called the high demand hot list, but we translate it to patrons for Reserve These Reads. So those are the books that come out. So say in the March issue, it'll be like, here are the hot books for March that you're going to want to place holds on. And you can look at Reserve These Reads and say, okay, we're going to have to make some read-alike lists for some of these. Next slide. Knowing about a book is one thing. You've also got to be able to talk about it. So a book list annotation is short and to the point, but it can be the blocks with which you build your book talks. Next slide. Finally, you can use Booklist Reader as a staff training tool in a few different ways. Next slide. Have staff on all levels read through Booklist Reader as each issue comes in. And Katie talked about having a link to the digital version in the staff newsletter. You can also put a copy when you get your bulk subscription in, steal one copy away and put it in the staff break room so folks can read it while they're, instead of playing Words with Friends or something while they're on a break. because the more staff members read about books and see book covers, the more familiar they'll become with what's out there and what leisure readers are looking for, and the better they'll be able to serve those patrons. Katie also touched on the fact that the reality of the public service desk is that sometimes youth questions come to the adult desk, sometimes an adult ends up in children's, and you just never know when an audiobook question is going to come in. Because Booklist Reader includes adult, youth, and audio content, folks who read the magazine will become familiar with the collections beyond the section they work in, and that will only serve to improve customer service, which is something we all want to do. And finally, I'm going to talk about those annual performance reviews that we all love to do. You can use Booklist Reader to create measurable goals for those reviews. You can set up the goal, for example, setting up a certain number of displays or book lists in a year. This goal was always really popular with my staff when I was a CERC supervisor. And you can refer staff to Booklist Reader for ideas and resources. So you're not only giving them an accomplishable goal, you're also giving them the tools to accomplish that goal. Next slide. And there are many other ways you can use Booklist Reader with staff. The sky's the limit. But I'm going to let you guys get creative with Booklist Reader, and we'll turn it over to the floor for questions.
Thanks so much, Susan, and thank you everyone who's helped with all these presentations. That was so informative. As a reminder to all of our attendees, we are going to have some time for Q&A right now. So any questions you have about Booklist Reader, please put them in the Q&A box. We have a wonderful floor of experts here that can answer. And we are going to kick off. I see some questions already in here, so we are going to kick things off with a question for Dan Kaplan. Dan Kaplan is one of our marketing managers, and he handles a lot of the difficult subscription stuff and the tech side of things. But a question came in about the digital version of Booklist Reader, and if we could expand on what it looks like when you click on the digital version of Booklist Reader, if it's an embedded widget on a library website. So Dan, could you chime in, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So you each subscriber to Booklist has a unique link, and that link is connected to a widget. And so if you have a Booklist Online profile, you go into that profile to get your links. And everybody that is a subscriber to Booklist is entitled to having a Booklist Online profile. So, but what does happen is that when you share out a link in either a newsletter or on your website, it goes to a landing page on Booklist Online, and that landing page has, every issue that we've published, a link to digital. Grace is going to, I think, bring up. Okay, so here's an example of a library, Cannon Beach Public Library, and they're using the widget to display the current issue. If you scroll down, that's our November issue. So it automatically updates using embedding our widget. And it's a simple piece of coding. If you click on that, Grace, it will take you to the Booklist Reader landing page. And so then the patron can click that. It bypasses all of our sign-in requirements. And Grace, if you scroll down further onto that, yeah, there's an archive of all of our past issues. Once you go into a digital issue, you can also, a patron or yourself, you can move between the different issues. Once you get into the actual reader, there's the ability to move to different issues.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. And speaking of the digital issue, so the digital issue is a really wonderful alternative to maybe some libraries that the print version doesn't get a lot of play, or we have discussed with some libraries that have moved completely digital. And I was wondering if any of our library guests, so Katie, Montoya, Rebecca and or Susan or Heather, I guess anyone could talk a little bit about how to advertise the digital edition with your patrons. I know it was mentioned a couple times about putting it in newsletters, but are there any other ways that libraries can share the digital edition and kind of get it in the face of their patrons?
I don't know about other libraries, but my library has, you can access it through Libby, the Booklist Reader through Libby. So that's one way for book clubs. That might be something that you promote during your book club meetings, that they can, if you have some book club patrons that use Libby to read their books instead of the physical book or the audiobook, that might be one way to just share that link with them during your book club meetings.
And with the staff newsletter or your patron newsletter, remind patrons that they can just click right in to Booklist Reader. I'm hoping they can click right into that if we post the link to the digital issue.
Right. And actually a really good reminder that Booklist is available on Libby and Overdrive. So yes, that is definitely a way that patrons are able to access it. Thank you both. We have another question about subscriptions. So Denise has asked if our library already has an account and or a subscription with Booklist, would the new Booklist Reader print subscription be included and automatically sent with each month's book list? If so, how many copies for patron distribution will be sent? So I think this is another question for Dan.
George, feel free to answer that if you want, or I can take it.
Oh, you can chime in. I'll kick it off, and then you can chime in if I miss anything. But so Booklist Reader Digital is included with the subscription to Booklist. But as I mentioned when I opened the presentation, the print copy of Booklist Reader, there will be an additional cost for print copies. So we're managing the print in bulk subscriptions. So if libraries order print, it comes in bundles of 50 or 100 or 150. And there's a separate cost for that. So I think there was a slide in the beginning that 50 copies a month would be $375. And then there's sort of tiered pricing as more higher quantities are ordered. Dan, did you have anything else to add to that?
50 is not the maximum you can buy. You can buy as many as you need. So in increments of 50. So there is, as George said, a pricing scheme on the website, and goes up to 1,000 copies per month. But we can accommodate and quote for higher numbers. But so far 50, 100, 200, those seem like some of the starting points that at least the mid-sized libraries are starting with. And of course, the first print issue is going to arrive in January, but you can share the digital starting right now. And many libraries have been sharing.
Great. I have a question next for Montoya, who talks specifically. Montoya has a very great article that we did include in all the reminder emails, and we will include in a follow-up. But Montoya, I was wondering if you could expand specifically on the books to lecture topic you discussed in your article and how Booklist Reader works with that specific type of programming.
Well, I look for topics. And so with Booklist Reader, there were a few in there that I had mentioned. Hold on, let me get my notes here. There were some, there it is. There were some books about, like, for example, it was like Black History Month. And there were stories in one of the issues on that slide, I believe, where it mentioned African-American cuisine. And it also mentioned, I think, Chinese soul food and Haitian dishes. So a lot of things, like not for, I wouldn't use all of those in the same month, but for Black History Month, it was African-American cuisine. And so that would be something that could either inspire not only a display, but a topic. And so I have worked with a lot of different a lot of different people in my community, and I can reach out to them and say, hey, I read about this topic or I read about this topic. I don't always say where I read it, but I would say I read about this topic and I was wondering if you could help me put together maybe a lecture focused on this particular topic. Not necessarily am I going to use that particular book to be the main topic, but I could use the topics that are highlighted in those books to use the topics to use for lecture topics. And I mean, and the way Booklist Reader, I mean, they have so many different recommendations, and the food was just one thing that stood out to me because I don't know about you guys, but I like to have food programs in my library. And so that just kind of stood out to me. But there's other things. I mean, it focuses on, like I mentioned earlier, there's books about global history. There's books about trauma-sensitive topics that may be resonating with people in your community. Those are just different topics that are listed in the monthly issues of Booklist Reader, and you can just kind of go through them and see if some of those topics would work as programming topics.
Great, thank you. And there are a lot of other really fantastic programming ideas and some of those links that we sent out in our reminder emails. But moving on to more questions about content. We do have a question from Patricia about making collections more DEI focused and about the diversity of content in Booklist. So I was wondering if someone from the Booklist editorial team could talk a little bit about that.
I can lead us off while Susan, if Susan's coming on too. But yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that I find as an editor at Booklist, talking to librarians across the country, is learning how individually diverse each community is. And while, yes, there is a lot of content, diversity content that focuses on the lives of African-American and Latinx people and authors, that the expanse of diverse experiences is really vast. I manage the audio section, and I can say, so the person asking the question is specifically from Canada, and I've seen some great audio content in particular coming out of Canada, focusing on First Nations authors and First Nations characters and their experiences. So I'll be honest and say it's very possible that you will find an issue that doesn't have a lot of things to meet the very specific need of every individual community, but Booklist editors make a concerted effort that every single one of our features includes content that represents a range of experiences, both in ethnicity, but also in ability levels and just a diverse range of experiences and religious backgrounds and things like that as well. So it's something that is constantly in progress. I don't think that we'll ever get to a perfect representation for every single community, but I can tell you that we are genuinely working in every issue to represent the best and most interesting range of content that we can.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that Heather said. And as she mentioned in her slides, Booklist Reader content comes from regular Booklist, and our regular Booklist content is diverse. All of our lists are diverse and or have representative of multiple cultures and multiple points of view and multiple ability levels, and so you will find that reflected in the reader as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And kind of to expand a little on the kind of bridge between Booklist and Booklist Reader, Heather, you touched on this in your presentation, but could you talk a little bit more about how Booklist Reader is reshaped a little to fit the reading, the reading levels of patrons in general? There's a ton of library lingo in Booklist as it is, which obviously patrons wouldn't be aware of, because how would you if you didn't work in a library? So could you expand a little on that?
Sure. So we'll take a list that is useful to librarians for selecting content, and we'll, because things are moving very fast sometimes, we'll take a look at that list if we're thinking about putting it into the reader and think, is this still representative of the best content that we want to present, or is there something that we want, is there a title that we want to take out and we want to add a new title? Focusing on something that the reader in the library can get their hands on soon. It also gives us another chance to add that extra diverse title that might have come out recently that we want to be sure gets a fair shake and gets some notice that it might not otherwise get. If you've looked at Booklist for selection purposes, you might see that some of our descriptions and little intros are specifically geared at librarians for selection purposes. All of that is going to be stripped out and directed specifically at a patron browsing and looking for content to pick up and take home and read. Interviews that we reprint from authors or audiobook narrators, we're going to look at those interviews and make sure that they're focusing on the elements that are going to be most interesting to a library patron, a library user, because sometimes we know that the articles can skew a little bit librarian heavy, focus on some industry jargon and things like that. We try to remove anything like that that would be off-putting to a patron, and just really make the articles zippy and zing for the reader. As you can see on the examples here, we're trying to really get as much color and as much interesting artwork onto each page so that readers, when they pick it up, they're going to page through and immediately be able to tell where is the adult section, where is the youth section. I think that's a real strength of the Booklist Reader, is that we have content for adults, for youth, and for audio readers all in one package here. And I think the art does a good job of explaining that to readers.
Thank you. Yes, the art is fantastic. Our production team works very hard. I want to move in general to kind of talk a little bit more about how Booklist Reader can be used as a training tool for library staff. I think that's a super unique function and really useful, especially as we know everyone's kind of overloaded. We're all catching up constantly. And I wanted to start with Rebecca, because Rebecca and I have been to a few conferences together, and I've heard you talk about how great it is to have the list, your LibraryReads list, just pretty much centerfold right there. Could you just expand on how your list can be useful in the printed form or on the digital version to help kind of relieve some work and train some of the library staff?
Absolutely. So I'm really glad that you made that joke, because I wanted to make the joke and I thought that might not be so professional if I come on and I'm like, look, I'm finally a centerfold. But yes, I have gotten a lot of mileage out of telling people LibraryReads is the centerfold in the Booklist Reader. It's so awesome. But one of the things I always say to people, so as Grace Ann just mentioned, we were at ARSL, had our booths right across from each other, which was delightful because we came across a lot of folks who already knew Booklist and already knew LibraryReads, but maybe didn't know everything. And then we came across a lot of folks that were not familiar at all. And the thing I'm always saying to people, I say this in the different readers advisory trainings that I do as well, is things like the LibraryReads list every month and the top 10 lists that you find in every issue of Booklist. Those are fantastic ways to fill your brain with books that you don't actually have to read in order to be able to talk about. So one of the things that we all know is people that come into your library, really and truly, they think that you have read all of those books on the shelf. It sounds funny, but you know it. You've all encountered this. They think that you have had a personal hand in buying every one of those copies. And so you work in the library. You must just sit and read 100 books every day, don't you? So I always like to tease that lists like this. And even before I was with LibraryReads, I used to work for Booklist, and I would tell people that all the time too. Read your reviews. They will give you all of the information that you need in order to be able to confidently speak to a reader about that book what it's like, what are some read-alikes. It's really wonderful. So for example, the one I was using, we were just at the Wisconsin State Library Association last week, and I had my lovely copy of Booklist Reader out because it fits so nicely in those 8.5 by 11 Demco acrylic holders. I was telling people, you just put that right at your circ desk. You put that right at your reference desk or your reader's advisory desk or in the stacks. People will see that. And what's really wonderful, so we've got this, the list I'm looking at here happens to be from June 2022. And one of the books on it is Fake It Till You Bake It by Jamie Wellesley, Romance in a Bakery, right? Trendy things right now. We've got tons of rom-coms on the list. So everybody who wants to like, well, you know, I really like these kind of cozy romances. I really love stuff that takes place in coffee shops or in bakeries. So I was pointing out, look, it's going to take you maybe 45 seconds to read this nice little blurb about Fake It Till You Bake It. And you instantly have that in your brain. So you can recommend that to someone who comes up to you and says, oh, I just finished the latest Jasmine Guillory, and I really like those kind of fun, breezy romances. What do I do? Boom, you've got one right there. Same thing with the Booklist Reader content. This is why I love so much that they've taken the content that we adore as library staff, and they've sort of, you know, just trimmed it down for your average reader because they don't know our reader's advisory jargon. They don't need to know that. They just need to know what's a good book. And so I'm always telling people, read the book list reviews, look at those top 10s. Those are things you can read really quickly, really easily, and they will stick in your brain and you can say, aha, why, yes, I have read all 10 of these books, ha, 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 this month, and they don't have to know the truth at all. So that's my little pitch that I always give for that our patrons think that we have a brain full of books. And so lists like LibraryReads, lists like the top 10 from Booklist, articles that have, here's something on all one theme, takes you no time to read that, get those in your brain, and then you can give them to your patrons.
I want to jump on what Rebecca was saying too. I can't count the number of times that I would be working at a reference desk and a patron would come up and ask for a list, and I would think to myself, I just read a great list like this, a top 10 read-alike list in Booklist, and then I kind of like would bashfully hand them my desk copy of Booklist because it's definitely not patron friendly. It has all of these other reviews on the page. It doesn't have the great book covers that I want them to see how engaging the content is and things like that. It was excellent content, but I would end up just kind of jotting down a list, handwriting a list to hand to the patron. And so I think that this is another way that is great for you as a librarian, as a library staff member who might have already seen this list, to be able to present to your patron in a really attractive and appealing way that list that you found so useful. I want to point out also that all of the content in the Booklist Reader, even if you're not subscribing to the print, if you're a subscriber to Booklist and you have access digitally to the Booklist Reader, any individual page can be printed and given to the patron as well. And so that's a nice, quick reader's advisory tool that you have there at your disposal.
Absolutely. And to piggyback on that, again, these things really look nice printed out and put in one of your Demco stands and just, plopped throughout your stacks, put one right there at the circ desk, post it wherever that you would post your New York Times bestseller list, put it next to the new stuff. Everything, the designers at Booklist are really careful about what the pages look like. As Grace Ann had said that earlier, they really are making these sort of a one sheet printout. And so if you've got your digital access, you can print those things out, pop them out through all your library. I guarantee your patrons are going to love it.
Yes, lists, read all the lists. That's the tagline, but not really. Okay, I do want to ask Katie about this too, because Katie, you had a really great discussion about using Booklist Reader as a training tool. So could you also expand on that a bit?
Sure, because for as long as I've been doing reader's advisory training, I've always used Booklist as a reader's advisory training tool, especially those issues that focus on genres like the mystery, the gazetteer, and the science fiction fantasy spotlight, and the romance and historical fiction, and all all your various spotlights, even the nonfiction ones. What I like about using Booklist Reader when I flip through that is that it's, frankly, it's smaller. It's going to be a lot easier and a lot more fun to share that with the staff when I'm talking to them about why people like certain genres. And they can look at these lists, and whether I explain the appeal factors or not of a genre, what the staff will see as they read through a list is that they'll start to see how all of these titles go together, why they're hanging on a particular list that's got a great title, like Peruvian Poets that Donna put together a couple of issues ago, or Epic Fantasy Renaissance. I loved that feature. And that will just help the staff think a little bit more about how to connect our patrons with our collections, which in essence is Reader's Advisory. So I see using Booklist Reader like that now. Not that I'm going to totally get rid of Booklist when I do my training, but I know it's going to be a lot more fun because it's a lot more engaging the way this content's laid out and the way it's presented. So the staff will get to encounter this content the way patrons encounter the content. And that's the way I want staff to use our collections, the way our patrons use our collections, because then they become more informed about the collections and they become more trusted library staff. And we get away from that power dynamic of library staff who know everything, and more of establishing a trust connection with our patrons. So using it like that, using it online too, having staff get to know our online databases by looking at Booklist Online and then looking at Booklist Reader. I can see Booklist Reader being a lot more enticing for our staff and getting them to explore our different Reader's Advisory tools on our online database page.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. We have a question about display cases, so I will pass it over to George.
Sure, thanks, Grace. And since we're nearing the end, I wanted to thank all of you for attending this webinar and thank all of our guests and speakers. When we first started thinking about Booklist Reader, we decided we needed to launch it in phases. So the first phase was really planning the editorial content, and that took some time. And the second phase was launching it, executing on the launch and launching it digitally, which we did in September 2021. And we're entering our third phase now, which is launching it in print, which starts in January. And we are going to, we're taking orders, we're promoting that, we're, kind of seeing how that goes. I think the next phase after that, and we have a lot of really great things that are happening behind the scenes and announcements that will roll out as we move on. But in the next phase, which would be phase 4, or as we settle into our print component of this, we'll look at things like display cases. We aren't launching with the display cases right out of the gate. So that's something we'll be considering a little bit later on.
Great. And as a reminder to everyone watching, on the screen right now is a QR code. And so just to clarify, if you subscribe to Booklist, you do get the digital version. That's included with your typical Booklist subscription. The print copies are a separate subscription. So we do have a special subscription offer right now that is Booklist for $75. And that's all of our print and digital copies of Booklist, online access, and also digital access to Booklist Reader. And if you miss the QR code, just send us an email after and we'll get you that link special. But I'm afraid that is all the time we have for today. A huge thank you to all of our panelists, our Booklist team, George, Susan, Heather, Dan, Biz, and Taylor, who are doing a lot of help on the behind the scenes side of things. And of course, our very special guests, Rebecca, Katie, and Montoya. As I said, if we didn't get to your question, we'll reach out through email after the webinar. And if you come up with any new questions along the way, please just email us at info@booklistonline.com. We're happy to help with any questions you may have. And don't forget, if you registered for this webinar, you'll be automatically entered for a chance to win 3 months free of Booklist Reader in print for your library. So if you're a winner, we will reach out. And we talked a lot about collection development today. And if you or your staff still need to learn collection development from the ground up, or just want a refresher on your skills, check out this upcoming collection development crash course hosted by our ALA colleagues at eLearning. You can find more information at elearning.ala.org. One more huge thank you to our panelists and our very special guests, and of course to you for taking time to join us today. This concludes today's program. Happy reading.